What's up, brothers? This is Travis back. This is gonna be kind of a different video for me. I wanted to kind of muse for a bit and just kind of share some thoughts and a hypothesis I have about training methodology that I've actually had since I was deep into my own training back in my early 20s, and just kind of ping it out, flesh out some ideas for the community, and maybe if there's people out there that are also kind of keen on training methodology and have some insights into this kind of stuff, then maybe you kind of weigh in the comments. Let me know your thoughts. But the topic I'm going to be talking about today is whether you can train oxygen transport, all right, the physical effects of oxygen transport using oxygen utilization steady state. Now, for people with kind of a basic understanding of training zones, they may be like, what are you talking about? But bear with me as I lay the backdrop of this. For people that might just be curious of kind of training methodology, but might not have kind of an in-depth understanding of it. So, oxygen utilization training is just going to be your aerobic training. It's based on how much lactate you're building up in your system at whatever training intensity. It's not a heart rate training zone, contrary to, I don't know if it's popular belief or just ignorant belief, but and it's going to encompass the bulk of your training as a rower. All right, so UT2, UT1 is what we're talking about here. Now, oxygen transport training is a higher intensity. So oxygen transport training is generally going to be conducted. It's going to be slower than a 2,000 meter race piece, but it's going to be a little faster than a 6,000 meter race piece. And generally when you're training transport and rowing, you are using intervals in the 2 to 8 minute range, and generally your rest, depending on the length of that interval or your experience or fitness level, can be anywhere from kind of a 1 to 1 or maybe up to 1.5 or even 2 for rest. So maybe you could do 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off, times 10 or something if you are a really kind of fit athlete that doesn't need that much rest. I like to do 3-minute pieces a lot with my athletes, and I'll use rest anywhere between 4 and 6 minutes for those, depending on how fit they are and where we are in the training cycle. And then I also do things like 3x2K, 2x2K are going to be transport, and so generally for me that would fall a little under 7 minutes if I do reps of that. And the rest for that would probably be about 10 to 12 minutes or so between each. So oxygen transport, generally kind of a shorter interval, but not kind of beyond, not into that lactate, not into 500 meter reps or anything like that. So those are the two categories. And then for oxygen transport has different functions depending on where you are in the year. And actually, it has one function primarily in the base building phase, and it has two functions, one of which is the same in the competitive phase, all right? And those two functions are, one, to increase the strength of the heart, all right? And so you're working the heart at a high effort level, and so you're training the heart to be a better pump, all right? To get physically stronger, because the heart is a muscle, all right? And that is going to be very important in the base building phase, because in the base building phase, you're increasing your oxygen utilization, all right? You're essentially laying pipe for delivery of the blood, of your liquid, and that if you just lay pipe and you don't increase the size of your pump, all right, your heart, then you're just going to have a very low water pressure. You're not going to be able to take advantage of all that piping that you're laying, all right? So you need to kind of sprinkle in a little bit of oxygen transport even in the base building phase to ensure that the strength of your heart is keeping up with all this delivery pathways that you're creating with your steady state, with your oxygen utilization. Now, that purpose, all right, is going to be useful both in base building and during your competitive phase, all right? You still need a strong heart in your competitive phase. You want to make sure that you're taking advantage of all that circulatory system to get the oxygen to your muscles for your performance. But transport training also has a dual effect when you're training competitive, and that is to kind of help with the development of your anaerobic capacity, all right? So your anaerobic capacity is simply your body's ability to kind of work in a lactate-rich environment. It can be, you can call it VO2 max training. It has a lot of different names depending on kind of the sport that you're going for. In rowing, they call it oxygen transport training. And in that competitive phase, unlike the general base building phase, your body needs to be comfortable or relatively comfortable, all right, working in a lactate-rich environment, and it needs to be comfortable working in oxygen debt, all right, and so that's why that transport takes a different function, and the composition of your transport workouts is going to be different as a result in that competitive phase than it is going to be in your base building phase. In your base building phase, you just want to kind of accumulate volume of training minutes with your heart working at a high percentage of its max effort, whereas in your competitive phase, you also want to be building up a lot of lactic acid. So generally your intervals are going to be a little bit shorter for transport in the competitive phase, and your rest periods might be a little bit shorter as well, assuming you've developed the fitness to be able to handle that, all right? And so transport is actually, there's two categories of transport. There's transport 1, transport 2. Those could also be called category 2 or category 3 if you're using that kind of cat 1 through 6 system of nomenclature. And category 2 training, or that transport 1 training, is going to be a lot closer to be like race intervals, all right? Practice race intervals. I like to call them repetitions, and I don't, and I'll call pieces or transport 2, I'll call that transport, all right? So I'll say repetitions for transport 1, and or category 2 for transport 1, and I'll just call transport 2 kind of my all-encompassing transport. The point being, this is kind of the basic outline of what transport training is and what oxygen utilization training is. Now, for me, as I was training and kind of developing my own methodology for training, there was a kind of subcategory that I developed for oxygen utilization, which I called aerobic capacity. Now, you know, the problem with all these terms in rowing and training is that these terms are used kind of across sports, and they're not necessarily the same, all right? So I'm just gonna say I called this workout aerobic capacity, all right? I also had workouts that I called aerobic endurance, and then I had my UT2, UT1, UT3. I would call things maximal aerobic steady state, kind of in the vein of Arthur Lydiard. You know, there's all kinds of things, all right? Generally, for me, UT2, UT1, I thought in the traditional rowing terms, all right? So it has a fixed stroke rate range, it has a fixed intensity, and it has common durations that you're doing for each. For aerobic endurance, I thought of aerobic endurance for my nomenclature, my term, as something similar to what cyclists do, so more in kind of a UT3 range, that long, slow conversational pace. Though I did kind of adapt that in certain ways to my own training, and I'll talk about that in another video. But for the aerobic capacity, what I called aerobic capacity was a version of UT2 that I developed that very specifically targeted the power component, all right? So the speed dimension of your drive, all right? And the speed dimension of your drive with a relatively heavy load, all right? So when I'm talking about power, and I've gotten some kind of criticism and comments before, people saying, this isn't what power it is. You're talking about power per stroke. When I'm talking about power, well, one, power itself has lots of definitions, all right? I also studied physics in college, and so I understand that power has a very specific definition in physics. Well, power also has a very specific definition for athletics and strength training, all right? And power in that sense, and this is power in the sense that I use it, power is talking about the speed with which you lift a heavy load, all right? So a heavier than normal load, and rather than in muscular strength, where all that matters is that you're moving that heavy load, with power, the speed with which you're moving that heavy load is also important, all right? So when I talk about power in my videos, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the speed with which you're moving a heavy load, all right? So with that aerobic capacity training, it was a specific version of UT2 that I created, and it was almost kind of UT1, all right? It was definitely in the gray zone, all right, of UT1, UT2, and it was meant to kind of overstimulate that power, to really kind of develop the strength of your stroke. And I would do this for a period of time, kind of nestled in between the base building phase and the competitive phase, and kind of on the closer end to the competitive phase if I was transitioning. So usually it was done in the maybe either the 12 to 16 week out from my primary competition. Maybe if I was pushing it, I would do it, you know, in the 8 to 12 week range, or at least as a focus from my main competition. And I would sprinkle it a little bit into my training, kind of in the maybe the 3 to 8 week away from my main competition, but it wasn't a focus. It was kind of like a once a week thing. But what is this training, you're asking? All right, so what this training is it's kind of a derivative of UT2 where you're going to bring your stroke rate down, all right? So you're gonna stay kind of in the 14 to 16 range, and you're gonna move your drag factor up, all right? Now I'm gonna say move your drag factor up, all right? I'm putting my drag factor close to or maybe a little bit higher than what I would use in racing. Now a lot of people out there use the same drag factor for all the training. I don't, all right? For UT2, I usually use a drag factor that's somewhere between 15 and 30 lower than what I'm using for racing 2,000 meters or 1,000 meters or even 6,000 meters. So for this workout, I would bring it up, all right? So for a lot of people, that may be what you normally do. For me, it wasn't, all right? And then after warming up, you know, 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes or so, I would shift to where I was not in that normal 16 to 20 range for my UT2. I would force myself down to the low end, 14 to 16 stroke rate, so low stroke rate, and I would really go after the power, right? I'd increase that drag factor so it's heavy, so I'm creating a heavier stroke by both bringing the stroke rate down and by increasing the drag factor, all right? And then I would basically just go after that for a very long period of time, all right? So usually it was somewhere between, I would say 60 to 80 minutes that I was spending at this intensity level, all right? So UT2 volumes, all right, at a very high intensity. And I will say for those that are like, oh, I gotta do this for 60 to 80 minutes, in that period, my median UT2 was 80 to 90 minutes, all right? Median, all right? I was peaking up for my long rows about 140 minutes or so, and my easy days were 60 minutes, all right? So that was kind of in context. So you can kind of adjust that appropriately to how much you would do this workout for, all right? I will also say that nobody who has deficient technique in any way, shape, or form should do this workout, all right? This workout creates an extremely high stress on the body, and if you do not have picture perfect transfer of power between your foot stretcher and that handle, if you don't have a very solid core and body position, then you should not be rowing with this kind of intensity on a power per stroke basis. All right, but if you do, if you're a high performance athlete or trying to be a high performance athlete and you row very technically well, then experiment with this, all right? You can try it out a little bit. Try it out, not all the time, all right? Specific parts of the year, and only maybe once or twice a week, and definitely only once a week if you're getting close to competition. So, very high effort. We're talking about, I'm basically trying to produce absolute maximal sustainable, almost race quality effort at that low stroke rate. And because it is a low stroke rate, I can maintain that kind of effort for a very long period of time, all right? This is extremely difficult, both mentally as well as physically, all right? That's another reason why I would only suggest for high trained athletes. But, all right, now that you understand what I'm talking about, now we can talk about the hypothesis that I developed with this training, all right? So if you're working at that high of an effort for that long of a period, your cardiac drift is going to bring your heart rate very high, all right? And so for those of you that think you should train with heart rate in your energy zones, one, I think you're wrong, and the primary reason for that is cardiac drift, all right? Because cardiac drift is gonna mean that the longer you work at a various intensity level, the higher your heart rate is going to get. That doesn't mean that you're moving into a new training zone, all right? If I spend 60 minutes of training at UT2 and my heart rate is drifting into what it would typically be a UT1 training category, that doesn't mean I'm training UT1 then. I'm still pulling a UT2 split, I'm still at a UT2 effort. I've simply been working long enough that there's enough muscular fatigue in my cardiac and my heart that my heart rate is having to contract more frequently to get the same amount of work, all right? So that muscle is getting tired, all right? Cardiac drift is the fatigue of your cardiac muscles, all right? So if I'm working at this level of intensity and effort for that period of time, we're talking, 60, 80 minutes here. By the time I get 40, 50 minutes in there, my heart rate, my cardiac drift has brought me well beyond my typical oxygen utilization, all right? I am well into that kind of 90% of my max, all right? Kicking around 180 and probably even above 180 for that, all right? I'm definitely well into the 170s, by the halfway point of this workout. So what's happening here is I'm spending a long period of time. I'm spending more than what would be typically needed for oxygen transport volume, all right, which is generally going to be somewhere, for from a low trained athlete in the 9 to 12 minute range to a very high trained elite athlete in the 24 to 30 minute range for transport workout. I am spending that amount of time with my heart rate in that 90+% zone of my heart rate max. And so then the question is, one, I am not creating lactic acid, all right? I'm still training aerobically, all right, thanks to that very low stroke rate and the fact that my split is still in a UT2 split range, right? And now I am going to be, that split is going to be right in between my UT1 and UT2, probably right smack in the middle for what I can produce at max effort at kind of a 14, 15 stroke rate. Can't quite get to a UT1 split on that, but I can get close to it, all right? So, but the split, all right, the energy output is what's going to determine your lactate production, and that's going to determine what your training zone is, whether you're aerobic or anaerobic. So I'm in what would be typical, a very high anaerobic typical heart rate, but I'm still definitely in an aerobic training zone. So the question, all right, it took me 18 minutes to get here. The question is, because I'm spending that amount of time with my heart rate over 90% max, am I generating the mechanical oxygen transport benefit in that workout that I would be generating, that I talked about at the beginning of increasing the strength of my heart, all right? I'm not creating the lactate. I'm not developing my anaerobic capacity, which is the other side of transport, the side of transport that we try to develop and focus on in the competitive phase. But my heart is working at that amount, that effort level. My heart rate is above 90%. I'm doing that for more than 20, 30 minutes in that particular workout. Am I creating an oxygen transport training adaptation for increasing the strength of my heart and being able to deliver blood within my circulatory system more efficiently? My hypothesis is yes. Yes, I can train oxygen transports, all right, on a mechanical sense doing aerobic training, all right? And so this opens up a lot of possibilities, all right? So then is that opening up the possibility that I could be training that oxygen transport and eliminating even more anaerobic training and anaerobic work from my general base building? Because generally you don't want anaerobic work in your base building, because anaerobic work is going to require a longer recovery time, which is going to decrease the amount of volume that you can accumulate in your general base building phase. And by happenstance, the main reason I'm training anaerobic threshold in the general base building phase is also not to spend time at anaerobic threshold. It is develop power. All right, it is develop, muscular power of my power per stroke in a way that is beyond what I could do for a high pressure steady state. So then that expands my hypothesis to the fact that can I use this special version of UT training, all right, this what I call aerobic capacity, all right, and I call it aerobic capacity because it is an aerobic workout and it is at my capacity of effort, all right. So can I use that special Travis Gardner blend of aerobic capacity UT training to develop both oxygen transport to increase the strength of my heart, because I'm spending a lot of time at a oxygen transport plus 90+% heart rate, and can I also be training because I'm also at an extremely high power per stroke, which is my main reason for training AT within the general base building phase. Can I use that to essentially eliminate all anaerobic training from my aerobic base building, my general base building training phase of the year? It's a question, all right? Unfortunately, my time of using myself to experiment for my own training theories and methodology ended 15 years ago when I stepped away from high performance training. And honestly, through my coaching career, my coaching has been focused primarily on youth, and even high performance youth that are competing at and winning medals and maybe in the top podium spot at national championship. I would not even have confidence in their capacity for training and their technical foundation to put this kind of training volume on them. All right, even those athletes were training somewhere in the maybe 8 hours of training volume a week. All right, and I don't think they had the maturity to implement this kind of training. This kind of training is very much reserved for kind of third and fourth year collegiate D1 athletes, pre-elite athletes, basically adults. All right, these are adults with a significant training history of people that have prescribed this anaerobic capacity. Now, would I do it in smaller volumes? Sure. All right, so I have definitely given my youth athletes 20 minutes of aerobic capacity of this type of training. Low rate, high drag, very high pressure per stroke. But 20 minutes, if they're doing that for 20 minutes, basically I did that for them to develop the power per stroke and to develop their sense of aggression, all right, at that point, and make sure they could really go after it. But if they're only doing 20 minutes of it, they're not accumulating enough volume, all right? Their cardiac drift has not had enough time to get them into an oxygen transport phase. So while that may be a substitute for anaerobic threshold training, AT training for those rowers, it is not a substitute for the oxygen transport. All right, so that is it, all right? That's my hypothesis, all right? I do not have the resources to test that. I am confident enough that if I did decide to go back into high performance training and I wanted to try to win club nationals or Canadian Henley or Masters, why would I focus on Masters, Worlds, or Nationals at this point? I'm only 39. But anyway, if I wanted to compete at that level again, I would go in with 100% confidence of using this hypothesis and applying it and seeing if I was able to create the same kind of training adaptation with it. So that's it. I thought it was fun to talk about. This will definitely be going into my advanced training concepts playlist, of which I believe there's only one other video where I was talking about kind of advanced application of drag factors. I'll link that there if you want to check out that video and hear me talk about kind of drag factors on a whole different level. But that was it. It was fun for me. I like talking, kind of going through these thought experiments. All right, this is kind of how I kind of push my own threshold of understanding training methodology and increase my own understanding of it. So hopefully you guys kind of enjoyed kind of following along with my thought process on how that works and kind of my condensed summary of what oxygen transport training and oxygen utilization training are. But that is it. This is definitely a do not try this at home if you are not a high-level athlete. I'm sure there'll be somebody that does try. They're like, oh well, I do 60-minute steady states all the time, and I'm just gonna try to do 60 to 80 minutes of Travis's aerobic capacity training. Please God, just don't hold me responsible for what's going to happen there when you're rowing with your subpar technique. So that's it. If you have not had professional coaching for your technique, approach this with a great deal of caution and probably don't try it, all right? Because you will, I guarantee you, if you row with that kind of effort per stroke and you don't have a very solid body mechanics and power transfer, you will injure your lower back, all right? And you will probably crack a rib too if you do enough volume of it. So yeah, so that's it. Something to think about, and something for kind of the higher level athletes to maybe experiment with. And definitely throw your input in the comments below. I'd love to hear what your kind of insights, what you think about this hypothesis of mine. If you think I'm kind of crazy, if you think I'm absolute genius, whatever it may be, throw it down below. I'd be eager to hear it. But if you would like more stuff like this, if you want to hear kind of Travis's crazy hypotheses about training, let me know as well. I'm always happy to kind of just be a talking head and thinking about a kind of training methodology. So that's it. Subscribe if you want more craziness like this. Like this video if you enjoyed listening to my crazy technique rant or training rant. And that's it. I'll catch you on the next training video, and have an awesome day, guys. Bye.